Just wanted to say, I really appreciated, Mayor's introduction and Katie's presentation over here. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that even though you may not be in an area where emerald ash borer is, you are only one infested log away from having an infestation, because that's really all it takes. Work done by my colleague Deb McCulloch in Michigan found out that in 1 square meter of bark, which would be like if you had a 1 foot wide pole that was 3 feet long, you could have up to 80 emerald ash borers coming out of that. Okay, so when you have that image of yourself, that much firewood could just cause an outbreak. And when you have people driving around in RVs, maybe taking a little extra firewood from home from a tree that might have died, and if it was an ash, it could have emerald ash borer, and these are just sort of ticking time bombs. So being aware of a rapid death of ash, more so than you would normally see where you are. These are it's really important, and all these websites that are available in your states for reporting the information. It's really important because you really are the eyes. There's just simply no way in the world that the departments of agriculture in your states or the departments of forestry in your state can be and cover the entire state to detect where emerald ash borer is. And you, because you're out working in the field, are going to be a very important part of the solution. So with that, I'm going to start to let's see. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start with my take-home points by saying that, this is, as Katie suggested, emerald ash borer threatens the survival of ash in forests, in rural forests, and in urban areas. Early detection and rapid response is absolutely critical to the success of any program. And after emerald ash borer comes through, there may be a few survivors, but all those big ash trees, a lot of the big ash trees are just going to be gone, and the forest will forever change its composition. There are some successful management tactics that are available, and I'll be talking about some of that, including biological control, as well as the use of pesticides and something called SLAM, which stands for slowed ash mortality, where it's a combination of biocontrol and pesticides that would slow the rate of the decline of the ash forest to provide you with options for preparing for uh, future management activities. And the last thing I'll talk about will be how insecticides can be used to help manage losses in of to EAB in urban areas. So here we see an ash tree, and you'll notice that one of the things which I find that makes this distinct from just a generally stressed tree is that the top of the tree is thinned. Okay, so the top of the canopy is lost first, and that's because the emerald ash borer attacks the tree on the top of the canopy. Okay, and then as the tree declines, more and more the attacks get lower and lower down the tree. So this is a serious problem, and I just want to give you an idea of what happens once it's in a city. My colleague Chad Tinkle, the city forester in Fort Wayne, tracked the removals of all the ash trees over an 8-year period. And what we found, the first trees were lost in 2006, and by 2013 they had lost 14,000 ash trees, okay, which is nearly 100% of the untreated ash trees in that area. So just as a rule of thumb, once emerald ash borer starts going, once you start noticing your ash forest is starting to decline from emerald ash borer, the amount of trees that can no longer be treated doubles every year. So you start off with 1% that can no longer be treated, followed by 2, followed by 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and by 8 years, it's all said and done. So you're working on a little limited time window once it appears. So this is why you have to be prepared. Now, after 14,000 ash trees were lost in Fort Wayne, there's a river called the Maumee River, which runs right through Fort Wayne, and they had increased flooding. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Davy Tree, the iTree Eco package that they have. There's a number of these things out there. Their rule of thumb is that a 12-inch diameter ash tree can uh, uh, can absorb 2,500 gallons of water, or intercept 2,500 gallons of water a year. So you can imagine when you lose 14,000 ash trees, you have an amazing amount of increased flooding. So this is just to give you some historical perspective of how things worked in. This is how it got here. It first arrived in Michigan in 2002 when it was first detected, and it was spread year by year through the Midwestern and the Eastern states. And this is largely moving through firewood. And although hopefully the nursery trade was not a big issue because that was pretty much stopped. And then eventually in 2022, it was found in Oregon, and Katie gave us a more up-to-date picture of where it is right now. So at this point, I want to back up. I read this paper by Ahmed in 2023 that gives you some sort of abstract concept of this whole invasion process. And this is really important for you because some of you are in the middle of an emerald ash borer invasion, and others of you are not. And so when you look on the left-hand part of this slide over here, where it says introduction, it takes quite a number of years for the populations to get large enough for it to actually start to be detected. So I know that the work that was done in Michigan, they estimate that the first emerald tree in Michigan that was attacked by emerald ash borer sometime in the mid 1990s. Okay, like in maybe 1992, and it wasn't detected until 2002. So that's almost like a 10-year lag. So when Katie is mentioning that they think that emerald ash borer has been in Oregon for a lot longer than since it was detected in 2022, um, she's absolutely right. And I would not be surprised if it was there for almost as much as a decade. And what that means is that logs with firewood could have been moved around, and so it could be sprinkled in a lot more areas than you might think. And then once it's detected, after it's detected, there's a certain period of time where you can actually eradicate the pest. But with this pest, eradication has not been possible because it's a beetle that's about an inch long, and it's dark green. It blends in with the canopy, and it's just really hard to detect until it starts killing the tree. And by that point in time, it's already 5 or 6 miles away from where that where it was from where it was basically. So what happens is that we're in a situation beyond this blue line where eradication is difficult or unlikely, and we have to figure out ways to live with emerald ash borer and by locally mitigating the populations. So let's go through the life cycle. This is the life cycle from our bulletin here for the Midwest. And should be pretty similar. So they spend the winter as larvae beneath the bark, about an inch beneath the bark in this J-shaped larvae. And then they come out sometime in May with that classic D-shaped exit hole because they got a round belly and a flat back. They come out in May and in June, then they will mate. The adult female has to feed on leaves so she can mature her eggs and lay eggs in July. The eggs then will bore directly through the chorion, through the eggshell, into the trunk and beneath the bark. So it's not crawling on the surface of the bark, okay? And that's why we're using systemic insecticides, because if you put insecticides on the top, you're not going to get those larvae that hatch, as among other things. And it has characteristics galleries. Now, this is a nice video I took of the emerald ash borer laying eggs. Now, watch this. This little tongue-like process that she's sticking out of her butt, basically, is her ovipositor. That's her egg-laying device. And she lays her eggs into cracks and crevices inside the trunk. And she does that so that the ants, as we saw crawling around over there, just don't pick up all those eggs and eat them like little emerald ash borer candies. Okay. So if you get a chance to see these, it's quite a fascinating behavior, but they're quite prolific, and each one will lay about 80 to 100 eggs. So we got an insect with enormous reproductive capacity and an amazing ability to find ash trees and spread the problem. Okay. So, what what do we do? EDRR, early detection, rapid response, should be what all of you are thinking about. And I can see from when I'm looking at your literature, you all are. You want to monitor for the presence because when you can detect it early, you can reduce the extent of injury, or at least preventing it from being spread from one infested area to another infested area. You delineate the extent of the infestation. You implement an action plan. I was really pleased to see that you all have these things. You then manage the population in whatever way is appropriate, restrict the movement of the pests from the area with firewood, any kind of products, and then you go back to step one because this is something you're going to be in with doing for quite a long period of time. And here's an example. This is, well, I guess from the Oregon webpage, and I'm going to give it a good thumbs up. You just you checked every single box that we suggest when you're dealing with invasive species. So let's talk about detecting and monitoring for a bit. Okay, these are the signs and the symptoms. Okay, and I've been a professor, I can't help myself, but a sign is the response of the plant to the presence of the causal agent. Okay, so in other words, the canopy thinning, okay, and maybe the bark splitting on the right are these are signs. I mean, excuse me, these are symptoms. The symptoms are the result of the insect being there, so the canopy thinning and maybe the bark splitting. But the signs are what the insect leaves itself, like maybe these frass galleries, these galleries of packed poop and sawdust, parts of the beetle itself. So it's really important to use both signs and symptoms when you want to confirm a diagnosis, especially in the West where we have a lot of trees which are pretty much parched. They don't have enough water, and they have some canopy dieback to begin with just for lack of water. Okay, so let's start with canopy thinning. The decline begins on the top part of the tree, as you can see on the left, until it progresses to the entire tree, as you can see on the second half of the slide on the right. Then we have increased woodpecker activity, and this is something I really can't overemphasize. These woodpeckers are just amazing at being able to find emerald ash borers. As a matter of fact, when we were doing some releases of biocontrols and we were trying to do some studies, we had to wrap the trees with gauze so that the woodpeckers wouldn't eat our data. Okay, I mean it's that heavy. Now, the woodpeckers do actually reduce the population, but it's kind of like the fire department being called about 2 hours after the fire starts. So they will, they can actually reduce the amount of the amount of damage, but that tree's going to that the building's going to be gone if you wait that long, and the tree's going to be dead if you wait for the woodpeckers to solve it, because they're just trying to feed on trees that are loaded with emerald ash borer that functionally has already killed the tree. So these are some holes left that you see over here, and and the like. Okay, so this zigzag tunneling is really critical. And here you can see this little spot where it actually stopped and molted, but then in the last molt, they burrow down right over here, and they burrow down and they wait until the springtime, and then they come out and make that deep shaped exit hole. The vertical splits. How do vertical splits happen? Well, you can imagine when the emerald ash borer starts to feed beneath the bark, they kill they destroy the cambium, which lays on bark tissue, and it lays on phloem tissue. Okay, it lays on the new bark, and it also lays on the xylem. And so you can imagine that so when trees grow, they're always laying on new xylem and new phloem, so they can create the bark, and the bark actually grows and expands as the tree gets thicker. But if you kill a portion of that trunk over there, that part's not going to be able to have new bark on, so that when the other side is growing, it pulls it apart and it actually splits. And that's how we get the vertical splits. And when you look beneath, you can see the tissue where the emerald ash borer has actually killed and destroyed that growing process. Epicormic sprouting. I've gone round and round of this with plant pathologists. We would call it, it's called epicormic sprouting because it's not from where you would normally expect it to come out. But functionally, we often call these things water sprouts. You can see this is a classic, what we see a tree within a tree. This is the tree's last gasp for breath. It's his last chance at trying to survive. You may be able to turn this back into a tree, but it's going to completely, if you use insecticides, but the structure is going to be different and it's pretty much a crapshoot. So once it's like this tree's pretty much gone. And also that bark is just the tree's incredibly brittle. The D-shaped exit holes are things that you can see. But as my colleague Deb McCulloch says, if you are walking on a street and you see next to an ash tree and you see 30 or 40 holes on the trunk of the tree, you should walk really fast because that tree's probably dead and it could fall down on your head. Okay, I mean, so this is probably the last thing you're going to see, and the holes are definitely D-shaped. And so here we see a heavily infested tree with lots of holes together. All right, let's think about something which we call population dynamics. And population dynamics is the rate of change in infestation and dieback of trees and canopy thinning over time. And this is what I call a conceptual model, which is a fancy word for saying I just made these numbers up to show you the process. So we know it's about an 8-year period that we go from when we start seeing defoliate canopy thinning, which means loss of the green leaf canopy, to 100%. So it's about an 8-year period. And prior to that, the emerald ash borer population, which is in blue, grows faster, increases faster than the canopy thinning in green. Okay, and then after most of the canopy is dead, there's not much left to feed on, and the emerald ash borer population declines, but it never goes down to zero. Okay, so people ask all the time, will the emerald ash borer burn itself out? And the answer is, as long as there are any ash trees growing in the stream banks and the like, they won't. So it's pretty much there forever. Now, conceptual models are great for explaining processes, but how realistic is this? Well, Klooster did some work in 2012, and they actually looked at the percentage mortality in some Ohio forests, in Michigan and Ohio forests, and what they found is that they recorded 40% mortality of the trees in 2005, and in 2006 it was almost to 80%, which pretty much approximates that doubling model. As because the trees are big, the amount of mortality slowed down, but that's because most of the trees had already been killed. Okay. This car also corresponds on the flip side of this is that as you have most of your big trees dying, most of your seeds, you have fewer and fewer seeds, and your seed viability also declines and goes down to about zero. Okay. So there's some real serious issues here that when you lose this amount of a forest, you are greatly changing the characteristic of the forest. And in some areas, we're talking about extirpations, which is a fancy word for just local extinctions of this. Okay, so here we are in Oregon, and Oregon is at this point in time a lot of when you're talking about outside of cities like Portland, Oregon has a lot of outdoor recreation. I'm sure there's a lot of trout fishermen and the like. It's a wetland species. It is a keystone. It's a keystone species in riparian or wetland areas, and it's used for wetland restoration. It affects the temperature of the water. It affects the dissolved oxygen and the macroinvertebrate diversity, which is basically the food that fish feed on. So it's a really big problem for forested areas, and it really would affect just dramatically impact the ecology of a forested area. So it's a serious problem. Now, one of the things I can't emphasize enough, and fortunately, a friend of mine, Dave, is driving this tractor over here, and he just pulled this. He cut the back of this tree on the right, and you're going to watch it uh, as it goes down. Hopefully the sound is up, but you're going to watch this tree as it hits the ground. It's done in slow motion, and when it hits the ground, it virtually explodes. All right. So you see it hits the ground, and watch these branches just fly through the air. Okay, that's a lot of uncontrolled movement of wood. Now, if my friend Dave was close enough to that log, that could have taken his head off. Okay, so this is really serious. They're incredibly brittle, and it's something you got to be very careful with when you're working with them. They're not like an elm tree that died of Dutch elm disease. They are ash trees are ring porous, and that means they only have one layer of functional xylem underneath the bark. So when that's cut by an emerald ash borer, it just dries out really fast and it gets very, very brittle. Unlike, say, an elm, which is diffuse porous, which has several layers of xylem to keep on conducting water tissue even after that first layer has been uh, destroyed, by the Dutch elm disease. Okay, so basically, I guess uh, it's very, very serious. You don't want, playing around with dying trees is kind of like juggling chainsaws on a unicycle. Okay, enough of that. So how do you manage emerald ash borer? This is a very talented young entomologist, Caleb Wilson, just hired in Kentucky. He did some work in Michigan after he was in North Carolina, and he published this excellent article on the regeneration of ash and other species 20 years after emerald ash borer. So if you want to know what it's going to be like 20 years after emerald ash borer has been, this is a real good picture of what you might see. And one of the things in this work and other findings is that all native and exotic ash are susceptible to attack by emerald ash borer to some extent. Green ash is far more susceptible than white, which is more susceptible than blue, and more susceptible than the Asian ash, which is somewhat resistant. White fringe tree is also susceptible, as are olives, olive trees as well. Now, there's something which they call lingering ash. And there's a recent study that was talking about lingering ash, which says that there's a very small proportion of trees that simply are resistant. Yeah, some mostly in the white ash, where it's most common here in the Midwest. And these white ash can survive the attack. That doesn't mean they're immune. It means that they're able to survive, and they can pass on that resistance to their offspring. But it'll take decades for that forest to come back on its own. And it's such a small proportion. So we're talking less than 5% of the trees are able to withstand and survive the attack. So this is not, so the lingering ash by themselves won't replenish the forest in any meaningful time span for us. Okay, so what do we see here? So this is the result of their study. So we want to think about uh, so let me explain this graph. We have two kinds of trees here we want to talk about in the graph A. Overstory trees, which are very large trees, the big overstory trees in the forest, and the recruits would be the saplings that have turned into the young seedlings which have turned into saplings. And what they found is that when they did a survey 20 years after emerald ash borer came, they found that about half the overstory trees were dead, and a little bit, and a very small proportion of them about half were living. And most of the ash trees that were in the forest were recruits. Okay, so these were seedlings that are starting to grow into new trees, and fewer of them were dead, and more of them were alive. But what you see here is that you can imagine an ash forest prior to emerald ash borer was largely overstory, and now the whole situation is flipped. All right. And in terms of saplings, there are fewer saplings than there are seedlings. So the point of the story is that ash trees can survive, but the older they get less able to survive over time. Now, classical biocontrol is what has been looked at over the last couple decade and a half or so, where where parasitoids, this is Tetrasticus, this is a larval parasite that lays an egg into one larva, and then each larva produces a whole bunch of other wasps coming out. You can see on this in the center part of the slide over here. We used a very sophisticated device here, which we call a beer cup. And we put those out onto the trees. This was early on, around 2010, when we were actually 2010 or 12 when we were doing these things. Now they have a whole new techniques where they actually give you logs that are infested with emerald ash borer that have been parasitized, and you hang these logs out. So you have a lot. It's a lot easier to get these parasites out. There are four species of parasites. Obius ogrilli is the one that attacks the eggs. Tetrasticus planopennisae is the one that was in the previous slide. These are the Spathius species. These have got long ovipositors. You see this little process on the end, that process on the end. That is an ovipositor is a fancy word for an egg-laying device. And the longer the ovipositor, the deeper it can drill into the bark to find a larva to attack and kill. And so what happens here is that if that ovipositor is too short, it won't be able to reach the larvae beneath it. So pretty much the Spathius gallinae is able to attack trees, attack emerald ash borer that have been in trees that are up to about pole size, 8 to 12 inches. Okay, so they can protect the trees up to that point. Then afterwards, it's less able to do that. But that buys an awful lot of time, and it really gives a lot of functional characteristics of the trees into the forest. So like they can actually start shading streams, and they can actually start producing food for some of the herbivores that feed on ash trees and ash seeds. But yeah, so we got, and the Spathius ogrilli seems to work better in the south. Spathius gallinae works better in the north. This is, I'm not sure what's going to work where you are, and that's the stuff of research projects that have yet to be conducted. One of the things that Caleb and his gang found out was that these are two graphs here. The graph on the left refers to the amount of the proportion of parasite of ash borers that were attacked by a parasite. So the higher this number here on the y-axis, the greater level of parasitism that you've seen. And so they find that as ash density increases, this introduced parasite, Spathius gallinae, seems to produce more offspring in response to having more ash trees and more emerald ash borer. But there's a native one of Phasgonophora sulcata, which is not able to keep that. So the good news of this is that emerald ash borer is actually, I mean, these introduced parasites are actually increasing mortality of the emerald ash borer more than what the natives would do. So it's actually doing a good thing. And one of the things another thing that he found was that the density dependence, or the ability to increase their numbers in response to the density of emerald ash borer, actually is stronger in the recruit, or the smaller trees, than in the larger trees. So that means it's going to help the smaller trees get bigger. All right, so that's all I wanted to talk about with biocontrol. And the key point of that is biocontrol actually does work. It contributes to mortality and of the emerald ash borer, and it helps the ash forest survive. Now, this is the latest edition of the insecticide options for protecting ash trees from emerald ash borer that Dan Herms, Deb McCulloch, and a whole bunch of us, even Whitney Cranshaw, who's local from you, were involved in putting together. And this is widely available on the web at www.emeraldashborer.info. It gives you a nice synopsis. I think we revised it, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it's fairly current, and it's something you want to consider. This is a summary of some of the things we want to talk about. And there are a number of insecticides that are available. There's imidacloprid and dinotefuran. These are neonicotinoids. Which may also kill pollinators. However, since ash are wind pollinated, it's not that big of an issue. None of the insecticides that we use, even emamectin benzoate and azadirachtin, which is a neem product, none of these things will kill the eggs. Imidacloprid and dinotefuran will kill small larvae, okay, and it will kill the adults after sustained feeding dinotefuran. Imidacloprid, dinotefuran will kill the adults after a few bites, and emamectin benzoate, just one bite from the adult is enough to kill it. And the emamectin benzoate kills all stages of the larvae. Now, azadirachtin kills all stages of the larvae, but it's not toxic to the adults. It will reduce the fecundity of the female, but it's not going to kill the adults. This part here on the left-hand part of the slide, these arrows, is really critical in this part of the country where you are living, because water is going to be critical to get that insecticide up into the canopy so it can get into the leaves, so it can kill the adults, and it can get into the xylem, then move into the phloem and kill the larvae. So without that water in there, it's just going to sit in a little puddle in where you inject it. You need that active transpiration for it to actually move around. So once again, the way the insecticides work is that when the adult comes out, the adult female has to feed for about 2 or 3 weeks before she can lay eggs. And if you have poison in those leaves, those females will die before they lay eggs. And that is so important, because what you're doing is you're killing the next generation of larvae before they're even in there. And then any larvae that are inside that tree will be killed. And because this insecticide works for a couple of years, you have quite this emamectin benzoate works for a couple of years. You can have some extended toxicity there. Okay. So how long does this protection last? This was a study we did in Indianapolis, and we wanted to see how well this works on large trees. So this was done at Eagle Creek Park, and my grad student Donnie over here is 6 foot, 6'2". This tree, the diameter at breast height is about 40 inches. Okay. So these are sizable white ash trees. Okay. White ash trees. So, and you can see the tree which is protected is alive, and the one which wasn't treated was killed. So there's a lot of emerald ash borer pressure here. So now, slowed ash mortality takes advantage of this ability of the adults to kill of the insecticide to kill the adults and before they can lay eggs. And what was done, that McCulloch and Rodrigo Mercador, what they did was they were working on the Upper Peninsula, and they girdled trees. They So what they did was they girdled trees uh, 14 days after they treated with emamectin benzoate. And what that did was the emamectin benzoate, when they loaded that into a tree, it gave them 14 days to get that insecticide up into the canopy so that all the leaves are toxic. Okay. And then by girdling the tree, it just sent the fire alarm out, a big alarm saying, hey, this tree is weakened. Okay. So lay your eggs here. So this becomes like a huge vacuum cleaner that sucks all the trees into all the beetles in the area towards the trees, and then they feed on the leaves and they die. And it really helps lower the population much more than by simply treating the trees or by girdling the trees. And they found that they were able to really manipulate and slow the rate at which ash trees were dying by deploying specific densities of trees in forested areas. And they also found that it was compatible with biocontrol efforts in the rural forest, because the injections were just underneath the bark, the parasites that were in the area could attack emerald ash borers on the untreated trees and then reproduce and continue to attack more trees. So it's actually quite compatible. They found that it actually slowed the rate at which the trees die, but it did not slow the rate at which the emerald ash borers spread. So what this does is it buys time for forest managers to maybe harvest some trees, or buys time to allow you replanting trees with other riparian species that could fulfill the ecosystem services provided by these ash trees. All right, let's now move on to so that's the rural forest. Let's move to the Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is a nice alley of ash trees in the fall in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And you can see these trees are quite healthy 19 years after the detection of emerald ash borer. So it's quite possible. So, if you're living in Portland, you're living in Denver, and you've got trees, the streets that are filled with ash trees that are being taken care of, you can keep them alive. Okay. Now, back in this study over here, I want to see how long this product actually can last. So what we did is we injected these trees in 2013 and again in 2016. And there are three trajectories on this graph over here. And the y-axis refers to canopy thinning. So the higher you are on the graph, the greater proportion of the tree is dead. So 100% canopy thinning means that there's no leaves on the tree. Okay. And surprise, surprise, the control trees, the trees that were not treated with any insecticide, we had nearly 100% of the trees were all uh, thinned without any leaves on them by 2017. All right. We started treating in 2013 when there was about, in the controls, about maybe 10% canopy thinning on the average. We treated some trees, we treated in the fall, these circles, okay? And then some we treated in the spring. And what's really important here is that the trees we treated in the spring, we saw no additional canopy thinning in 2014 and 2015. But by 2016, we started noticing a little bit more canopy thinning. So that says we had about 3 years, we had 2 years of absolute control. But when we retreated again in 2016, we saw a decline in the emerald ash borer in the canopy thinning that sustained itself all the way out through till 2019 and didn't start picking up again until 2020 and then moving up to 2022. So we got a quite long period of extended control in the spring treatments. The fall treatments, however, were not as effective. So basically, if we treat in the fall, we noticed that the first year it worked great, but the second year, uh, there was increased canopy thinning, and by the third year, we went from 10% to about almost 40% of the tree, 40% average canopy thinning, and that's pretty much unacceptable. So basically, what we're trying to say is that the spring treatments give you 3 years of control, and the fall treatment only gives you about 2 years of protection. And that's going to be really important. And then, of course, the other important thing is that that at some point, if you want to keep these trees alive, you're going to have to keep on treating, for the duration of the time you want to have that trees being alive. But you could probably uh, increase your rate after most of the untreated trees in your area have already died. Now, um, so another thing I want to mention is that once you have more than 30% of your canopy being lost, it's pretty much impossible to save that tree. Enough because the tree is so weakened, the structure is so fundamentally changed that it's really not worth saving that tree. So now, so the question that I'm often asked is why do arborists treat every 2 years when we know you only need to treat once every 3 years? Well, I was talking with one of my former students who's an arborist out in your area, and Adam Whitty, and he mentioned to me that he gave me the rationale. I think that it makes perfect sense. So if you have enough resources to spring treat all your clients, okay, and you can treat every last one of them in the spring, all right, you will be able to you'll be able to protect those trees if you treat once every 3 years. The problem is that you arborists have got a lot more to do in the springtime than just treat ash trees, and it's really hard to get all your trees treated in this short spring window. And the spring window begins after leaf out until for about maybe 5 or 6 weeks, okay, to maybe the middle of June or the end of June. All right, and so by by opening the window and allowing treatments into the fall, because as long as you're getting any kind of translocation inside there, you can treat more trees, but they're only going to be protected for 2 years. So basically, by having a spring and a fall window, you can treat more customers, and that's the reason that they're doing this. They're not trying to bilk their customers out of anything, but this is why it's being done. Okay, now let's go back to the Colorado situation. In Colorado, I was there in 2019, and I can certainly attest to the fact that these trees, you need to have a really good look at them to make sure they don't have emerald ash borer. Because when I went to a conference, we were a presentation we were giving about emerald ash borer in Denver, and we went to Estes Park afterwards. And every place I was looking, I thought, oh my gosh, this emerald ash borers everywhere. But that's not true. These trees look like this normally. You really have to be able to find the emerald ash borer itself, look for the zigzag galleries, all these things in order to actually confirm that emerald ash borer is there. Because if you're just looking for dieback, you're going to have a heart attack just walking down the streets of Denver, because they all look like they've been stressed by something, but they have not all been stressed by emerald ash borer. All these trees are irrigated in order to survive. Okay, unless you're in a riparian area, but I think and that like you are out in in the Willamette Valley. These trees are all stressed, and so you must be able to see them. Treatment, however, can save them once they have it. A tree like this can indeed be saved if it's treated and irrigated. So, if you want to get up-to-date summary of what's going on, this one is actually, I know, is open access. Uh, this an article I wrote with Deb McCulloch and my colleague Matt Ginzel, where we just looked at a lot of the myths about emerald ash borer in managing them in urban forests, and I think it's something that you might want to look for if you want to get involved in more of the details. So let me just do a little brain exercise here on what I would call back of the napkin economics for a single ash tree. So if you have an ash tree which with a 30-inch DBH, and that stands for 30-inch diameter, that's at breast height. So if you're standing in front of the tree and you put one hand inside on one side of the trunk and the other hand on the other side of the trunk, your hands would be 30 inches apart. All right. It's going to cost somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 to remove that tree, and 400 plus to replant that tree. Okay, depending on where it is. So if the tree is right next to a structure, it's going to be a lot more expensive to remove that tree than if the tree is in the middle of a field, because of risks and the different kinds of equipment that you have to use and the like. And the treatment cost, so you can compare that with the treatment costs. If it costs about $10 per inch with emamectin benzoate, it will cost you $300 to protect that tree for 3 years, okay, if you're treating it in the spring. So you got anywhere between, so it's about $100 per year for spring treatments, and you got between 24 and 44 years of a tree until you reach the replacement cost. So, it's a lot less expensive on a year-to-year basis to keep that tree alive if that's your only source of shade. Now, we developed, years ago, we developed this thing called the emerald ash borer cost calculator, where we used street tree inventories to allow people to evaluate different options. And there are three different options that we pretty much like cities to think about. One is let's just uh, let's just remove and replace the trees as they die. Another one would be to proactively replace all the ash trees over the next 7 years. And another one would be to save all trees with a diameter greater than 12 inches. Now, this DBH of 12 inches or greater is what is believed to be, at least in the Midwest, the optimal size tree that you want to save, because it takes a number of years. You have a lot invested. It takes a number of years to get that tree that large. So in order to optimize your investment in larger trees, you want to save just the bigger ones. But assuming that if this is a city and you're using in-house labor and such, it's a little bit less expensive to treat your trees. And then every 5 years after the initial, and it costs, we figured it costs about 2 inches, about $400 to replace it with a 2-inch DBH tree. And then after most of the trees have died, you'll be on a maintenance schedule of every 5 years or so. And this emerald ash borer cost calculators had been available at this website. Unfortunately, after I retired, due to security concerns, it got mothballed, and I'm in the process of trying to get this thing back up again. I'm meeting with somebody tomorrow to see what we can do. But if anybody has any suggestions, I'm open to ideas, because what it allows us to do is allows you to stage your response based on the percentage of ash trees that have lost their canopy and the like. And when I'm saying stage your response, if you survey your canopy and you notice, you can enter in the percent of damage of trees that are damaged or lost to date, so you know where you are in that destruction curve, and it tells you the years until all the trees have been. Do you have the years you have left to protect the trees before they're all dead? So what we found is that this graph here, this is the annual cost for a bulk spray bid at $5 per inch. Okay, we're finding that this is over a 25-year simulation period. This black line on the top part of the graph, and we're starting in year one, where we will spread that cost over time of removing and reactively replacing all the ash trees. Uh, and then here, if we spread over time, we have lower annual costs. We cut down and remove the trees over a 7-year period. And then this is if we just try to save a lot of the trees. So you'll notice that the blue line, we have lower costs when we're protecting trees. And then after most of the trees have died, the main costs are just for spraying the trees every five years or so. Okay, and this amount gets bigger because the trees are get the blue line gets peaks get taller because the trees are getting larger. We find that if we have a late start in year 5, the peak costs, rather than being about a $500,000, are closer to $700,000. Okay, so you can minimize your costs are lower if you're trying to protect your trees earlier. Okay, so that's why early detection is really important. Now, in terms of the yeah, so since this is and in terms of the total amount that you would spend over your period, your cumulative costs are going to be about uh $1 million. Well, $1.1 million if you start in year one, and about $1.2 million if you start in year 5. So early always saves you money and saves you annual outlays. Now, uh, this is sort of a no-brainer kind of a slide. It's one of those things where, like, if you save your tree, so these down lines, the red and the black lines, you notice as the trees die, this graph, the y-axis is the actual size of the forest, which is just the total amount of diameter breast height if you added them all together. And you're finding that as the trees die, your forest gets smaller. Okay, even if it gets smaller when you're removing and replacing and for a while. Then, as the trees which you replace them with get bigger, it starts to grow again. But you'll notice that if you save trees, you wind up with a much bigger forest. So the point of the story is that saving your trees will save the canopy, and that's what you're going to be after. So an early start is going to be critical to your success. So what about this SLAM idea? Can we apply this to an urban area? Well, we were fortunate enough to have a situation where we had an opportunity to uh, develop management programs on 3 different college campuses in Indiana. And what we did was we tried to have 40% of the canopy always being toxic by treating 40% of the trees with emamectin benzoate, so that the poison would kill the adult females before they laid eggs. And we found that the slowed population, that we hoped that the slowed population would slow the ash mortality. So we evaluated it on 3 campuses up to 6 years. And this is one campus map in Terre Haute, Indiana, Indiana State University. And all these circles represent ash trees, and all the black circles represent ash trees which are treated, and the other ones are untreated. And what we found, okay, so this is what the map looks like. So one of the things that we found with our study was that the proximity of treated trees, of treated and untreated ash, really improved the success. So when you have your treated and untreated trees very close to each other, the beetles will be able to wander from the untreated trees to the treated trees, and you have this bit of a shadow effect of having these emerald ash borer coming out from the untreated trees onto the treated trees and being killed by them. And that's less of an effect when you have the trees are that much further apart. And the only beetles that are being killed are the ones that were on the treated trees. And this is kind of what we saw. So in this area, we had this parking lot where all these streets that were lined with ash trees, very closely planted together. We found that most of the ash, treated or untreated, survived. We really couldn't tell the difference between treated and untreated ash trees when you had a high density. So if your trees are about 10 meters apart or 30 feet apart, you're going to find this effect is really very helpful. But where the ash trees were further apart, we found a lot more of the ashes were dying, and we found very little effect, very little ability of the treated trees to protect the untreated trees. We also found that when we started off with a healthier forest, we protected more trees. I mean, that's pretty much common sense, right? And so here we started in Indiana State University. We started where the percentage of trees that had lost more than 30% of their canopy was only 16%. Okay. So these trees, this dotted line refers to the percentage, the unsalvageable ash trees, those which exceeded 30% canopy thinning. We found that only we had about a 20% increase. You know, some of the trees didn't make it, but we were by and large able to save a lot of the trees that were treated with this triage product once every 3 years. I mean, excuse me, once every 2 years. The uh, trees which are not treated, we went from about 16% up to about 50%, which is a lot less than what we would have expected using that doubling model. We would have expected to have lost all our trees by 2016, and by 2017, we still had 60% of those trees still alive. So it did, in fact, slow mortality when we started early enough. Okay, so in contrast, let's look at IU, Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. There we started where more than half of the trees, 51% of the trees, had already lost more than 30% of their canopy. So by the end of our study, we have 80% of the trees dead, of the untreated trees are dead. Okay. The trees which are treated with emamectin benzoate, they tended to be staying alive, but it's not that much different than the untreated trees. So if you wanted to, so any program you're going to have, whether it's an urban slam program or it's just an insecticide program, starting early is just going to be essential. And other factors that we found was the species. White ash tend to die less quickly than green ash, and we found that, and this is what we found. This is the survival curves of the ash trees. The trees. So basically, these are the ash trees. The white ash trees that were treated with emamectin benzoate are alive. This light green line. Okay, the ones that were untreated, some were alive, but those which were treated here were oops, I got this is in the I'm sorry, let me just start over here. Let's refer just to the top line over here. The white ash trees that were treated all mostly survived. The green ash, we had a higher rate of mortality because green ash just doesn't seem to do as well. Okay. The untreated trees, which is the black line, we found that we only lost about 25% of those untreated white ash trees, but we did lose, close to 80% of the untreated green ash trees. So definitely green ash die more quickly than white ash trees. So that's pretty much what I had to cover over here. I just want to have a little plug for a bunch of videos. I made a website called the Purdue Plant Doctor with my colleague Jana Beckerman, and we made a bunch of quick video guides where we talk about managing key pests, making diagnosis. But there's one I want to bring your attention to, and this QR code will help you find it. There's a YouTube video we made on learning about managing boring insects. And there we start talking about, I talk about details about the structure of the tree, whether they're ring porous or they're diffuse porous, how injections work, and how to go about protecting trees from borers in general, and the like, which would be somewhat relevant to those of you trying to protect ash with injections. So with that, I'm open up for questions.